In the last module, we considered two great Western philosophers, Kant and Mill. Kant, the great principle-based deontologist, the one who considers the importance of duty and principle in the moral life, and Mill, who considers the principle of utility, that is, maximizing the good for the most number of agents, as the most important sort of factor in the moral life. This module, we consider an issue that is very important throughout the course of Western history, a political issue, an economic issue, a moral issue, the issue of justice, basically defined as being a state where everyone gets his or her due. That's what justice essentially is. Now, even though there's a lot of debate as to how people should get their due, or what their due is, or the mechanisms by which the due will be distributed or given to different people, that basic notion of justice as being a correct situation socially where everyone is fairly treated is a pretty standard kind of idea. We're going to look in this module at two different thinkers, two different traditions, as to how to deal with this issue of justice. The first one is Thomas Aquinas, who is a medieval philosopher who basically relies an awful lot on the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle for his ideas, and then the contemporary 20th century social philosopher and thinker John Rawls. And they have two kind of different ideas about where justice should come from or how it should be spoken about. The purpose of this little introduction video right here, though, is to guide you a little bit through the reading of Thomas Aquinas, because I suspect that his style and format is going to be a little bit unfamiliar. Again, he's writing in the middle of the 1200s, so that's quite a long time ago, and so it is a different kind of writing style. I've given you a whole bunch of pages from Thomas Aquinas' great work, the Summa Theologiae, question 58, which is of justice. So in the course of all these pages, Thomas is dealing with this issue of what is justice all about. You'll notice as you begin to look at the pages, and the pages themselves run from 1434 to page 1443, that in this whole question 58 of justice, it's broken into 12 sections called articles. And in each of these articles, which you can follow along through the pages, Thomas deals with a different aspect or a different facet of what this question of justice is. I want to give you this hint. You don't need to be concerned about every paragraph and everything that's being discussed here, because what Thomas does, the way he frames his presentation is this, and this is a very traditional way for a medieval philosopher or a theologian to write. The beginning of every article is essentially a question which can be answered yes or no. The first article you see here at page 1434 is whether justice is fittingly defined as being the perpetual and constant will to render to each one his right. That's essentially a different way of saying that justice is each one getting his or her due. Now, that is posed as a question which can be answered yes or no. The next section of each of these articles will be Thomas laying out the objections to what his answer will be. So he begins by treating what his opponents in a controversy would say. And this is kind of interesting because in modern day political debate, in modern day academic discussion even, we very rarely present at the very beginning of our presentation a respectful and a thorough treatment of what the people who disagree with us want to say. But that's what Thomas does. So he says here, we proceed thus to the first article, objection number 1. It would seem that lawyers, and he begins to sort of deal with the objections that are raised. The next section, which we can find on page 1435, at the top of the left-hand column, is, I answer that, in which case Thomas then begins to talk about what his opinion is. He begins to actually creatively and constructively lay out what he has to say about the issue. And you really get to know what his opinion is, because now he's not dealing with the objections, he's dealing with what he has to say. And then this article and every other article ends with, and you can see kind of at the bottom of that first column there on page 1435, you can see a reply to objection number 1 and a reply to objection number 2. He goes back to the very beginning of the article where he lays out the objections to his opinion, and then he replies to them. He gives what his own answer to the objection is. Now the point of this is to say that if you really want to know what Thomas has to think about any of these issues, you don't have to read so much at the beginning or so much at the end of every article. You've got to look at the very middle of every article, the section that begins, "I answer that." So, for all 12 of these articles in Thomas, if you really just concentrate on the section in the middle of every article that begins, "I answer that," then you will have a pretty good idea of how Thomas thinks of virtue. There will be another short video towards the end of this module that will introduce you to John Rawls and then some reading for John Rawls, and then we'll have the opportunity on the Blackboard discussion board to compare and contrast some of these different opinions. So looking forward to that discussion.